I would love you to maybe tell us a bit more about how you became the global thought leader on the future of work and management practice.
It's a great question. Why and how am I so passionate about work? Well, it started because I worked, from the very beginning, really, even as a relatively young person, I was doing work in cafes and factories and things. And then I did my PhD in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I went into an organization, then I came out and I've been in London Business School ever since. And the whole time I've been interested in how we work, why we work as we do, what organizations do about work, but also our working career. How does it go from now until the age of 70 or 80 when we're all going to be working? And along the way, I wrote a lot of books. I really consider myself a writer these days. I taught at London Business School. I teach a class about the future of work. I teach executives. And also I got a chance to advise CEOs and in one case, a prime minister. So it's been wonderful.
You wrote a book in called The Shift
Yeah.
2025, which was
Yeah.
about the biggest shifts that would happen in the workplace.
Yeah.
Um, Predictions about
Yes.
2025. And now
Yeah.
we are in 2025.
Yeah.
Like news flash, if anyone didn't know, we are in 2025.
Yeah.
So, what are your comments on that?
Well, that was a really fascinating thing because I wrote it 10 years ago about 2025.
Yeah.
And what I did is I said, look, and I would say the same now, the future is completely unpredictable. So what I used was a process that some companies use called scenario planning, where I said, imagine the best possible scenario and imagine the worst possible scenario for 2025 and the worst possible. And I looked at all the things that shape our world, demography, technology, social trends, and so on. And the bright scenario, as I called it, was a world of cooperation where people use the technology to work cooperatively together, where micro entrepreneurs became the norm, where we had a lot of craft-based work, and the negative was loneliness, fragmentation. And I suppose for me, the sad thing is that I was pretty accurate about the negatives
Yeah.
and not so accurate about the positives. And I do think that we have to think, particularly now with generative AI, in a much more, much stronger way about how we interact with AI and not just let it flow and we sort of end up running after it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's quite sad in a sense, but
And
also pretty amazing for you and your expertise because it means that you hit the nail on the head.
well, yes, I did, but of course I didn't predict the pandemic. That was one
Yeah.
thing that I didn't get. Actually, most people 10 years ago didn't predict the pandemic, and there were some people in medicine who were saying it might happen, but I don't think anyone really had understood how enormous this thing was going to be and how it would
Crazy.
change the way we thought about work.
Let's talk about longevity. You've written a lot about longevity. You've done tons of research into longevity. So, what are your main concerns with this, and how can corporations redesign their structures to support longer careers?
Well, in the shift, when I looked at all the things that were shaping the world, I looked at, technology, social trends, and so on. But I also looked at demography. And then later on, I started working with an economist, Andrew Scott. And when you look at the economics of longer lives, then it becomes a very compelling story. And the compelling story is that unless you've saved right the way from the beginning, at least, you're looking at me in a very special way now, at least 20% of your income. There you are, just giving you the data there, everyone.
Goodness, and yeah,
From
noted.
pretty much the moment you start working.
Oh.
Yeah. Then you're going to work until you're in your 70s.
Okay.
And part of the reason, and I was 70 last week, and part of the reason I carry on working is because I told everybody else they had to. So I thought I better give it a go myself. And actually,
Yeah.
the truth is, it's fine. I mean, I'm a role model for that. It's absolutely fine to be working into your 70s. Honestly, it's fine. But you do have to have work that's interesting. So most of my work about long lives has been addressed to individuals. It's people like you, where I say you have to master something, you have to continuously learn, you have to realize that your working life is going to be different. It's not going to be full-time education, full-time work, full-time retirement. It's going to be what we call a multi-stage life, where you do lots of different things. You might start your own business, you might take time off, you might travel the world. All sorts of, and you have to think quite intentionally about that and how it all works. So that's really what I've been talking about. organizations are in the main very ageist. So what we know is that if you lose your job at 50, it's pretty difficult to get another job in a corporation. And so that's a problem and an issue.
What do corporations need to do with the EU being 25% of the workforce is over 55?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So populations are aging, and they are aging right across Europe. And so, what we want to see is more people over the age of 55 working, because work is good. You may not feel that when you think about
I
being
love
70.
working.
Well, there you go. Imagine doing it till you're 70.
Well, I think that there's something to be like my dad, for example, when I speak to him about retiring, he's at the retiring age.
Yes.
He speaks about never wanting to retire because he wants to work forever and he wants to live as long as possible.
He's absolutely right. That
He
actually
wants to remain engaged.
people who work carry on building skills. They work with different generations, which is
Yes.
amazing. I always make sure that any team I've got, there's young people. London Business School, for example, right now, we have teams that go from the age of 20 to the age of 80. We have people in their 80s working, who I think are very inspirational, actually. And so it's great to have different age groups. It means you're interacting, you make friends at work, you're connecting, you get up in the morning, you look after yourself, you do your nails, you do your hair, all
Yeah,
that sort of
discipline.
stuff. Yeah, and you become disciplined.
So looking at a multi-generational workforce then,
Yeah.
We move from, a 65-year-old who's grown up in a very different environment to Gen Z have. And
Yes.
they've got different expectations from their
Yes.
workplace.
The thing that's made a massive difference is the pandemic. Before
Yeah.
then, organizations were pretty much structured in the same way they were when I joined 40 years ago. The pandemic has changed a lot of that. And so organizations are beginning to change. But I don't think that your experiences are fundamentally different than my experiences as a 20-year-old. And I think that we just have to realize that lots of people want the same thing. You want flexibility. Well, I want flexibility. You want an interesting job. Well, I want an interesting job. I mean, how are you and I different from each other in that respect? I mean, I'm older than you are, and so I'm not the same as you. I'm not, in fact, in a team, I'm great because I'm not very political. I've already achieved what I want to achieve. I'm extremely collaborative. I'm a joy to work with, actually, in a way that I certainly wouldn't have been at 40 when I was much more ambitious and political. And the book I'm writing at the moment looks at the memories of my own life. But it also puts it in the context of many other people's lives. And really what I'm arguing is that we can all have great working lives. What we have to do is we have to think about how do we stay productive and how do we nurture and care for ourselves? And those are the two big questions that we face right the way through our life. You face it at your age, I face it at my age.
Yeah, that's an interesting and refreshing way of putting it.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. Talking about hybrid work.
Yes.
Which is what you are very well known for, and a lot
Yeah.
of the biggest corporations in the world seek your advisory on this. What are your comments on hybrid work at the moment? Lots of companies are going back to full-time work. I just would love to know your perspective on everything right now.
Well, just to put it in context, the reason that I got into hybrid work and redesigning work is that I follow the trends as they emerge. And so the pandemic, as soon as the pandemic started, I started keeping a diary. And I've now got my whole, all of my bookcase is full of these damn diaries. And I wrote every single day, so that when I wrote Redesigning Work, I already had a year and a half of conversations, data, research behind me.
Okay.
And so, what the reason I looked at hybrid is because it was a result of the pandemic, which is a huge exogenous event that happened that affected all of us. And what it did is it tested our assumptions about work. My view is that if the pandemic had happened 10 years earlier, we would not have had the technology to be able to work from home. So it would have been a disaster for work. As it was, we already had the technology. Now, we mostly didn't use it properly, but we did have we had Zoom technology. And so the move to home happened really quickly. I was
quite
talking
seamlessly in a
absolutely, I mean, astonishingly, actually. And so when people spent 2 years, if it had only been 2 days or 2 weeks at home, we'd have all snapped straight back. But because it was 2 years, people were beginning to ask themselves, I've now established a new way of living. I've now established a new home. I've moved to the country. I've done different things. And so it's been very difficult for people to go back to where they were. And organizations have struggled to say, let's forget about those 2 years, especially when what's emerging at the moment is a huge variety between companies about what they do. And
Yeah.
I don't think I was with a board yesterday evening. I don't think there's any right or wrong way. I mean, I don't think JP Morgan is wrong to say, I want everybody back in the office. And I don't think that Airbnb is wrong to say, you can work anywhere you want, anytime. It's just, you've got to be clear what the deal is and what the consequences of that deal. So, for example, if you're JP Morgan, there will be people who are talented who won't want to join you. And if you're Airbnb, it's probable that it's not going to be so easy for you to train people, to nurture them, to coach them, because you don't have very much face-to-face time. So, as long as you understand what your business strategy is, why you're doing this, and what the trade-offs are, I think an organization can do anything they want, as far as I'm concerned. You just have to think it through and be prepared to accept the trade-offs. So ChatGPT, for me, was like the first day of the pandemic. The day that I saw ChatGPT was felt, and I started keeping a diary again about ChatGPT. I'm not going to write a book about ChatGPT. I only really write about it I have a column in the Times, and I write for MIT, and I write sometimes for other, and I only write about generative AI if the thing is going to be published within 8 days. Anything more than that, and you're already
Is it just because
looking.
the landscape is so rapidly changing?
Yeah, it changes so quickly. And so I won't be writing a book about generative AI. Of course, I talk about generative AI in everything I write, and I personally am very concerned about generative AI. And I've been I did a Forbes article last week where I began to talk about what my concerns were.
What are those concerns?
Well, my concerns, I speak really as a university professor, is that I don't mind my students using ChatGPT to do their essays. In fact, I would imagine they would do that, because if you use ChatGPT for a knowledge-based task, you do get 30% better results, because mostly it's faster. And I use ChatGPT, or DeepSeek in my case, almost on a daily basis for the work that I do. But what it does is that it's very convergent. So, the very way a large learning model works is that it converges quickly into the highest probability. I can see I've already lost you. The highest probability next word. And actually, what the human brain is brilliant at is divergent thinking. If you were to say, why am I successful? It's because I'm a divergent thinker. I go like that. And a machine goes like this.
Yeah.
And so if you're not careful, and if you ask a machine a question so I've written a book which is very divergent, and I asked the machine to write the book for me just recently. I gave it all the parameters and I said, write it. We'll write the chapter headings. And it did a pretty good job, but it didn't have anything in it that was interesting or implausible or amusing, or it would never have sold as a book, because it just looked too boring. And that's the problem, is that once you keep converging, it's what we used to call the sizzle. When I wrote cases about companies, I was working with one of the world's greatest case writers, and he said to me, Lynda, always look for the sizzle. Not just
the
thing you've heard over and over again, but the one thing where you go, I haven't heard that before.
Yeah.
And that's what I do. I roam around the world, talking to lots of people at government, in corporations, MBA students, kids, my own kids, blah, blah, blah. And I'm looking for the sizzle. I'm looking for the thing that I'm seeing where I go, I hadn't heard that before. That's interesting. And you won't get that with ChatGPT. You'll get a massive amount, but it won't tell you what the sizzle is, because it doesn't know what the sizzle is. It's a machine. And that's why when people call it a brain, it always slightly annoys me, because it isn't a brain. I mean, let's be clear about what the human brain is. It's absolutely astonishing.
Yeah.
And we've got to learn to produce work, to design work in a way that this astonishing, brain can actually do and enjoy doing and be creative around. there is the recruitment is sort of frozen at the moment. Nobody's moving, but actually the most talented people will always have an opportunity. So how do you retain those people? How do you create a culture where everybody feels that they've got, they can meet their highest potential? And then sort of organizational structuring issues. How do you create speed and agility in terms of the structure of your organization so that it's not too bureaucratic? They're still fretting about hybrid. How do you make hybrid work? And it is a fret, actually. What might? How do they? How do you continue to run an organization that's successful and yet meet people's needs? And I think that can be really challenging.
Well, thank God they can sit down and talk to you.
Well,
because they've brought in the right person to really tackle that issue.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest mistakes that you're seeing them make?
Well, I think, one of the big mistakes, particularly around hybrid, is just letting your own value system dominate the organization. And when a CEO, says, like Elon Musk has said, everybody's got to get into the office, that's his value set, and he's making his value set into everybody else's value set. Now, there may be circumstances where in some of his businesses it is right that everybody's in the office, but I think that you've got to go through a logical process and work out what's going to work right for you. So I think that's certainly one of the challenges that they face right now. And also, secondly, not always understanding what it is their most talented people want. And some of their most talented people will be prepared to work in the way that they feel is appropriate, but some of their most talented people will not be. And my worry is that they lose some of those people.
You often contribute to Harvard Business Review, MIT, The Times. Just before we started rolling, Lynda was telling me how passionate she is about writing.
Yeah.
And that's your main focus. And you're an academic, really.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk to us a little bit about your company?
Oh, yeah. So HSM was created actually some years back when I created something called the Future of Work Consortium, which I created out of London Business School, which was a group of companies that got together to talk about the future. And then very quickly we realized this would be better run outside of London Business School. So we set up a company to run, the Future of Work Consortium, which is still going on to this very day with some of the same members right the way through. And since then, we've also built new tools, new techniques. So we have this I'm very interested in cooperation. So I've written about it. I've written 2 books about cooperation. And so it's a tool, it's a platform that allows up to 100,000 people to talk to each other in any language, and we can sort of make sense of what they're thinking about and help them have a conversation. So we've also built tools as well.
That's amazing. I don't know how you do it all. And you've traveled the whole of Africa in between all that.
And you haven't even asked me how many kids I've got.
How many kids do you have? No.
Well, it's a blended family.
Wow.
That was a.
You are Superwoman.
No, I'm not. No.
That's crazy. I've literally just, I can barely go to the gym after work, and you
No, well, I don't go to the gym after work, so you're doing a lot better than I am.
On you on that.
Definitely.
I don't think that they equate, but thank you. You can see how passionate you are about writing and sharing that knowledge with corporations, and it's informing global corporations at a board level, and you're informing the future generations of work, which are through your lecturing and the work you do there.
Yeah.
So you really are.
And you're very personal.
And you're a psychologist.
You're very personal.
Yeah, very personal in your speaking and your advisory, and that goes far. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's been a privilege.